Have you ever had to make a tough moral decision? When it comes to making good decisions, Jiminy Cricket tells us to always let our conscience be our guide. And that's actually a sentiment the church agrees with. But when the church talks about letting our conscience guide us, it doesn't mean just doing whatever we want or think is right in the moment. Rather, the church insists that it's only through a well-formed conscience that we are able to truly know right and wrong and make good decisions. So what is a conscience? A conscience is our natural sense of right and wrong. It's that part of us that tells us what to do or what not to do. It compels us to do good and to avoid evil. It's that little voice inside us that we listen to. St. Paul calls it the law that's written on the human heart, while the Catechism of the Catholic Church puts it this way: moral conscience present at the heart of the person enjoins him at the appropriate moment to do good and to avoid evil. It also judges particular choices, approving those that are good and denouncing those that are evil. It bears witness to the authority of truth in reference to the supreme good to which the human person is drawn, and it welcomes the commandments. When he listens to his conscience, the prudent man can hear God speaking. So our conscience judges our acts. It's connected to the virtue of prudence, which is the virtue that helps us to discern what action to take in any given situation, and it compels us to do the good and to avoid the evil. This is why the church says we must always follow our conscience, because we must always do what we believe is good. That doesn't mean, however, that our conscience is always correct. At the Second Vatican Council, the bishops of the church taught, "Conscience frequently errs from invincible ignorance without losing its dignity. The same cannot be said for a man who cares but little for truth and goodness, or for a conscience which by degrees grows practically sightless as a result of habitual sin." In other words, our conscience can make mistakes, either because we are ignorant of the facts of a particular situation, or because we've neglected to properly form our conscience, to not learn what is right and wrong, or because we habitually sin and choose the wrong instead of the good. This is why the church insists that we must form our consciences and pay attention to good moral authorities and good moral teachings. So, ask yourself, what sources or authorities do you turn to when you have a moral question? The church asks us to learn from and be guided by the sacred scriptures, either through regular reading of them, especially through Lectio Divina, the prayer of reading the scriptures closely, or even just by paying attention to the scriptures during the liturgy, when we hear the scriptures unfolded to us in the readings and in the homily. The church asks us to be attentive to the teachings of the magisterium, the church's own authority in determining what is right and wrong. The whole third part of the catechism is devoted to the moral teachings of the church to help us to know what the church believes is good and what is bad. Now, it's important to note that the church's moral teachings isn't just a list of do's and don'ts. Rather, it seeks to form us in a moral vision of the good, to orient ourselves to the good in all ways, not just by telling us what not to do, but by forming us in virtue, what we should do. The Church's teaching on morality can also be found in various papal teachings, clarifications from the Holy See in Rome, and through good sources such as the National Catholic Bioethics Center, which helps us to think through issues relating to medicine and bioethics. The Church also enjoins us to pay attention to good scientific facts and good information. This is why the Church is concerned that science is done well, and for a good, robust media that isn't just there as propaganda, but to help us to know what is going on in our world so that we can make good choices about it. We can't make good decisions if we don't have good facts. The Church wants us to have good facts. And finally, the Church tells us to be attentive to our own sense of ourselves. The Church calls this the principle of interiority, to that own still small voice within us. But it also points out that that's difficult to do in today's world. We are so bombarded with distractions, things vying for our attention and our time. So we need to take time for that quiet and that reflectiveness that's required for cultivating that interior self through things like the daily examen prayer or monthly participation in the sacrament of reconciliation. These kinds of things will help to form us over time as we participate in them. Some other principles that the Church gives us for a well-formed conscience include the fact that we can never do evil in order to do good. In other words, the ends don't justify the means. This is a system of morality called utilitarianism, and it's condemned by the Church because it increases evil in the world rather than decreasing it. The Church also points to the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, as a good principle for forming our consciences. It's important to note that this is a moral principle we share with many other religions and cultures across the world. And finally, the Church tells us that we must respect the conscience of our neighbors, Because the conscience of each individual is inviolable, we can't compel others to go against their own conscience, their own sense of right and wrong. Vatican II says that the conscience is the most secret core and sanctuary of a man. There he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths. That doesn't mean we have to agree with other people's moral choices just because they believe them to be good, if we know them to be objectively evil. It does mean, however, that we can't compel others against their will to do something that they believe is wrong. The work of forming a conscience is a work of a lifetime. When we fail to do the right and choose to do evil instead, we should try to make amends for that, to resolve to do better next time, and to redevote ourselves to the holiness that we have been called to as disciples of Jesus Christ. Here are some questions for you and your family to reflect on this week. Have you ever had to make a tough moral decision? How did you decide what to do? How did your Christian faith impact your decision? How has your faith helped your family strive to change the world for the better? What compelled you to act this way? And how has your conscience been formed over time? What sources or authorities do you turn to when you have a moral question? And here's a family challenge for you to undertake this week. Pray the Examen prayer every night this week as a family. A link to a simple examen can be found in this video's description. Reflect on each day and ask, where was God present? In what ways did I fail to live as a disciple? And how can I do better tomorrow? From all of us at the Diocese of Lafayette-in-Indiana, may God continue to bless you and your family.